A reporter asked a 22-year-old Olympic champion if she thinks before she speaks. Her answer is a lesson in neuroscience. Olympic gold medalist Eileen Gu's reply wasn't just clever, it's backed by years of neuroscience research. That's what a reporter recently asked Olympic champion Eileen Gu, already the most decorated freestyle skier in Winter Olympic history. At 22 years of age, Gu has become known for her fiery quick responses to reporters' questions. "I'm a very introspective young woman," Gu replied. "I spend a lot of time in my own head." Gu then shared something exceptional. "You can control what you think," Gu continued. "Like, you can control how you think, and therefore you can control who you are. And especially as a young person, with neuroplasticity on my side, I can literally become exactly who I want to be." As an emotional intelligence coach who's studied the most successful performers in sports and business for over a decade, I can assure you what Gu is highlighting. The brain's ability to adapt and change is a major lesson in unlocking success in work and life. What exactly is neuroplasticity? And more importantly, how can you use it to achieve your goals? Let's break it down. If you enjoy this article, consider signing up for my free emotional intelligence course. On a bright afternoon in the mixed zone of the Olympic Stadium, the air buzzed with static, cameras clicking, microphones hovering, questions ricocheting from one exhausted champion to the next. She was only 22, draped in her nation's flag, gold medal resting against her collarbone like a second heartbeat. A reporter leaned forward and asked with a half smile, half challenge, "Do you think before you speak?" The question carried more weight than it seemed. It was the kind of question often aimed at young women who speak with certainty. It implied impulse. It suggested recklessness dressed as confidence. She didn't flinch. She didn't rush. She paused. And that pause was the answer. Then she said, "I think before I speak. But more importantly, I trained my brain to know when to pause." The room shifted. Pens slowed. Cameras zoomed in. What followed wasn't just an answer. It was a lesson in neuroscience disguised as humility. The space between stimulus and response. At 22, she had just broken an Olympic record. Her event demanded precision measured in milliseconds. One premature movement meant disqualification. One distracted thought meant silver instead of gold. "In my sport," she continued, "reaction is everything. But reaction doesn't mean impulse." What she was describing, though she didn't use the textbook term, was executive control, one of the core functions of the brain's prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex, the region just behind the forehead, acts like a conductor of an orchestra. It regulates attention, inhibits inappropriate impulses, weighs consequences, and decides which internal voice gets the microphone. The reporter's question assumed speech happens automatically, but neuroscience tells us something else. Between a stimulus and a response, there is a neural negotiation. First, sensory information enters the brain. Then emotional centers, especially the amygdala, evaluate it for threat, reward, or social meaning. The amygdala is fast, ancient, protective. It is the part that flares with defensiveness when challenged. But the prefrontal cortex is slower, wiser. It asks, is this worth reacting to? What is my goal? What outcome do I want? When she paused before answering, she wasn't hesitating. She was allowing her prefrontal cortex to do its work. The myth of natural confidence. Another reporter jumped in. "So you're saying you trained your brain?" She nodded. "Of course. I train 6 hours a day physically. Why wouldn't I train mentally?" Elite athletes understand something neuroscientists have mapped for decades. The brain is plastic. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections, means repetition reshapes circuitry. Every time she practiced staying calm at the starting line, she strengthened inhibitory pathways. Every time she visualized the race instead of panicking, she reinforced networks associated with focus. She explained it simply. "When I was 17, I reacted to everything. Bad call. I snapped. Tough question. I got defensive. My coach told me, champions don't react. They choose. Choosing is a neurological act. Impulsivity arises when emotional circuits overpower regulatory circuits. But with practice, through mindfulness, breath control, visualization, the balance shifts. The prefrontal cortex becomes more efficient at regulating the amygdala. Reaction time doesn't slow. It refines. She didn't become confident by accident. She became regulated. The 3-second rule. A journalist asked, "What does that pause feel like?" She smiled. "It feels like 3 seconds." 3 seconds is long in a sprint. It's eternal in live television. But in the brain, 3 seconds can mean the difference between emotional reflex and intentional response. Studies in cognitive neuroscience show that even brief pauses allow increased activation in prefrontal regions responsible for cognitive control. Breathing deeply for just a few cycles reduces amygdala reactivity. Heart rate variability stabilizes. Cortisol drops. In simple terms, space creates clarity. She described how before every race she inhales for 4 counts, holds for 4, exhales for 6. The elongated exhale activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's brake pedal. "People think I'm fearless," she said. "I'm not fearless. I just don't let fear speak first." That line traveled across social media within minutes, but neurologically, it was exact. Fear always speaks first. It's evolutionarily designed to. The question is whether it gets the final word. Words as neural commitments. The original reporter, now less skeptical, asked one more question. Why does it matter so much to think before speaking? She looked down at her medal. Because words wire identity. Neuroscience supports this. Language shapes neural architecture. Repeated self-statements strengthen associative networks. Say, "I always mess up often enough," and the brain reinforces pathways that prime expectation of failure. Say, "I'm learning," and different circuits light up, ones linked to growth and resilience. Speech is not just communication. It is neural rehearsal. As an Olympic champion, she understands that repeated rehearsal builds myelination, the fatty sheath around neurons that increases signal speed and efficiency. Practice doesn't just improve skill, it accelerates neural transmission. "When I was younger," she admitted, "I'd say things like, 'I choke under pressure.' And guess what? My brain listened." The room laughed softly, so I changed the script. She began telling herself, "I compete well under pressure. I stay calm. I adapt." Repetition carved pathways. Performance followed. The social brain. But there was another layer to her answer. Thinking before speaking isn't only about self-regulation. It's about social intelligence. The brain contains networks dedicated to empathy and perspective-taking, the medial prefrontal cortex and temporoparietal junction, among others. When we pause before responding, we give those networks time to activate. "I used to answer to defend myself," she said. "Now I answer to connect." That distinction changes neural dynamics. Defensive states activate threat circuits. Connecting activates reward circuits. Oxytocin increases. Trust builds. The Olympic stage is global. Every word ripples across cultures. She understands that leadership isn't just speed and strength. It's modulation, youth and the developing brain. There was irony in the question she'd been asked. At 22, her brain is still maturing. The prefrontal cortex doesn't fully develop until the mid to late 20s. Yet here she was, demonstrating a level of executive function many older adults struggle to maintain. But development isn't destiny. Experience accelerates refinement. Intense training environments demand rapid strengthening of regulatory circuits. High-pressure repetition is a neurological forge. She acknowledged this gently. "I didn't wake up like this. I embarrassed myself a lot. I said things I regretted. But regret is feedback. Feedback drives synaptic pruning, the brain's process of strengthening useful connections and eliminating inefficient ones. Mistakes, when reflected upon, become optimization signals. In neuroscience, error detection activates the anterior cingulate cortex. That region flags conflict and signals the brain to adjust behavior. Failure isn't just emotional, it's instructional. The medal and the mind. As the press conference wound down, someone asked a final question. What's harder, winning the gold or mastering your mind? She didn't hesitate this time. Mastering my mind. The gold is a result. Her answer carried a quiet authority. The Olympic podium lasts minutes. Neural habits last decades. The gold medal proved her physical excellence. The pause proved her cognitive discipline. In that brief exchange, she demonstrated principles neuroscientists publish in journals. Regulation beats reaction. Pauses enhance executive control. Breath alters brain chemistry. Language rewires identity. Practice strengthens neural pathways. Reflection refines circuitry. But she translated it into something simpler. Thinking before speaking isn't about being careful. It's about being intentional. The lesson beyond the stadium. Hours later, the clip circulated globally. Viewers praised her maturity. Commentators called her wise beyond her years. But the real lesson wasn't about age or even athletics. It was about ownership of the mind. Every human brain operates under the same architecture. Emotion first, evaluation second. The amygdala sparks. The prefrontal cortex steers. When we rush, we default to survival mode. When we pause, we activate strategy. Her greatness wasn't that she lacked emotion. It was that she managed it. And that skill is trainable. Not through medals, but through micro-moments. Taking one breath before replying. Waiting 3 seconds after a provocative comment. Choosing a response aligned with long-term goals instead of short-term emotion. Rewriting self-talk deliberately. Reflecting on mistakes without shame. These acts may seem small, but in the brain, repetition compounds. Neurons that fire together wire together. Champions aren't built in stadiums alone. They are built in the quiet seconds where no one is watching, when the mind decides whether to erupt or to regulate. As the stadium lights dimmed and the crowd dispersed, the young champion left with her medal gleaming under fluorescent corridors. Reporters moved on to the next headline, but somewhere in living rooms and classrooms, someone replayed her pause. And maybe, just maybe, tried their own.